Avowed gameplay showed up at the Xbox Game Showcase, and many people were saying it was a significant change from what we originally saw. I called it a graphical degradation, but I did say the game looked fun. I said it was just a very good lesson in showing your games too early. Mr. Matty Plays has a very different view of this. We do agree on some points. I watched some of his video. I thought it would be a good video for me to react to, interact with. I like to do more dialogue-driven reaction videos. Be sure to support his video below. Check out his channel. I think he makes good content. I like Matty, and I wanted to react to this because he's coming at this from a very different angle that I want to push back on. I do agree with him about certain points, and I think he's got some excellent things to say in the video. So let's dive in. Make sure and subscribe to my channel as well for my live content, as well as uploads and reactions like this.
Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, sitting down to talk about Avowed. Avowed is a game I have been so extremely anxious to see for years now that I could scarcely believe it when it graced my screen during the Xbox Game Showcase this year.
A lot of people couldn't believe it because it took us a second to realize it was Avowed. Like, I'm not trying to be cheeky. We were like, wait, what game is this? And then we realized about halfway through, like, oh, it's Avowed. Like, it was such a big departure from the first trailer, and he's going to address that. He is going to speak to that. So I do think a lot of us were surprised, and he's not alone. Everybody was hoping Avowed would be there. It was at the top of every list of, like, predictions and expectations for the Xbox Showcase.
You know, I think back to the Xbox Wire post following the game's CG reveal and how they'd have more to share with us soon. Well, 3 years passed and we finally got a look at the game. There was a lot of positive things to be said, but I also saw some negativity surrounding the game, which confused me, quite frankly.
It didn't confuse me at all, because when the trailer ended, I openly said, I was like, wow. I was like, that looked like a completely different game. It looked a little bit more like Sea of Thieves. And I said, look, man, it looked like a blast. It looked so fun. But you had a lot of screenshots circulating of what everybody assumed the game was going to look like.
But I pulled myself out of the hype, out of the excitement, and took a second, third, fourth, fifth, objective, honest look at it, rewatching this trailer, as well as the original CG reveal, going through some of the notes that Obsidian has shared with us over the years, to really see if fans had been lied to.
This is the screenshot that's sort of infamous in every article, every blog post, every tweet about Avowed. This was the screenshot. People were very much looking forward to what looked like pretty serious game, very dark, foreboding. You're kind of down in this cryptic area, and you have a sword, and you have a spell. It almost looks reminiscent to Skyrim, but like a sort of updated, really exciting Skyrim, but again, more serious in its tone. And not that a game can't be goofy or silly, but the art direction took a pretty big change. I believe this was even leaked at some point a year or two ago. Somebody in the know said they made a big art direction change. We just never saw it.
Because that seems to be the vibe from some members in the community. Now, overall, it's a very positive reception, and I have many positive things to say. But when I saw the conversation spark up, I was like, is this console warriors, or are there people genuinely confused about this game? And I'm going to talk about that plus much more, because I've covered Avowed for years, man. To have this drop at the same time as an Exiles game, Fable, Starfield, obviously I'm up to here with things to talk about. So we're trying to just get all the conversations in and then take the deep dives afterwards. So ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here, you're into Xbox news, information, coverage of any kind, you're in the right place. We're going really hard right now, but you're making it worth it. So thank you so much for tuning in and for supporting what we're doing here.
Make sure and support his channel. Make sure and subscribe, like the videos, check out the videos. Whenever it's sort of feast and famine, it's been a big feast. A lot of news, a lot of videos. Probably not sleeping a whole lot, cranking out all the videos he needs to crank out. I know the feel. I put in a lot of extra time over the weekend to cover all the live events and the streams, so make sure you support the folks that put out the good content that you enjoy.
Avowed, let's start off with the surface level stuff, just my general thoughts. I think this game looks wonderful. It reminds me a lot of an Elder Scrolls game, which I think is the idea there.
Agreed.
With like
I agree with this.
Having a melee weapon, and the other hand doing cool spells. But to me, the thing that really spoke to me and my soul the most was the interactive magic. You know, when I play something like Skyrim, granted, 2011 game, but many other video games with magic in them, I see, quite honestly, very little making the most of the magic. So as I'm watching Avowed and I'm seeing you levitate enemies and bring them together in this void, lighting objects nearby on fire, this interactive nature made it look way more fun than it actually was. Now, there were cool first-person executions and whatnot, but we've seen that for years with Skyrim, where I feel like it was evoking the right things from Skyrim while still creating its own identity.
I agree that it seems to be carving its own identity, but it did look similar to Sea of Thieves at times, and I think that's always going to be a challenge. There's only so much you can do with art style. I think the departure from Sea of Thieves, something that I would focus on in the Avowed marketing, is all those biomes that look very unique and different, maybe even focus on different enemy types. Because the spell casting and the hands coming up, that's kind of become a thing all of a sudden. I don't know why lots of games are doing this. We saw this in Ghostwire. We're seeing this in Immortals of Avium and obviously in Avowed. So you're going to want to distinguish yourself there. This kind of feels like ESO and Elder Scrolls meets Sea of Thieves. And that's not a problem, but if you really want that identity, you want the, cement your game, you're going to have to really push in on some of those identity markers.
You see, the other reason I'm very interested in Avowed is because I've never played a Pillars of Eternity game. A wrong that I will right by the time these games are out, I promise you, because I want to do re-reviews for them to kind of immerse myself in the world and the lore of Pillars of Eternity, so I'm familiar with stuff heading into Avowed. You know how I roll, right? I just can't read about it online. It's like I gotta play it and spend 85 billion hours just seeing it for myself, because that's the only way my brain processes it properly. Now, with all of that said, that's the reason I'm excited for Avowed, is that is going to be a dive into a new look at Eora, which is the world of Pillars of Eternity, and how they're going to capture that from originally what was an isometric RPG with lots of choices and consequence. And
a lot of people might not know this, so this was good information. I actually haven't done a ton of research into Avowed. I remember just seeing screenshots and gameplay and thought, oh, that looks really cool, because again, the concept looked neat. I didn't know they were building it in this world.
What it translates into this here. Because when you look at the Xbox Wire, one of the main focuses that they brought up with this gameplay trailer is choices and consequences. And if you listen closely to the audio, it's a lot about you have this power, what are you gonna do with it? And you'll see a lot of back and forth shots of you're doing a good thing, you're doing a bad thing. You're doing a good thing, you're destroying people, you're saving people. And I very much appreciate that, because as a fan of Obsidian games, I love me some choice and consequence. That's not to say I didn't like games such as Grounded, but this is where their bread and butter really lies.
And I didn't know that. Sorry, that's a terrible frame. I don't like freeze frame. Reaction videos are tough because I don't want to make the person look silly. That's actually good information as well that I didn't know. The choices and consequences is just good info here that, oh wow, it's not just going to be like a throwaway action sort of RPG game where you're casting spells. It's going to come down to decision making. It's going to come down to choices matter. Now, I do feel like sometimes video games throw out that lingo and then the choices don't seem as impactful or as important. It'd be really cool to see games dig into that a little bit more and make it more consequential, because sometimes it feels not that consequential. It sort of feels inconsequential when you make these choices.
Now, for me to get deeper, I feel like I gotta go head to head with the talk of the town here, which is a lot of people feeling conflicted about the overall tone of the game. A lot of people saw the art style and went, I thought this would be more serious and realistic.
I went further than that. I said it was a graphical degradation because, and this is going to touch on some of the commentary I've had about the Fable trailer, Fable being sort of in-engine the entire time. And well, it's not CG, it's simulated gameplay. That's what it should look like in the game. It's in-game or in-engine footage, but it's not raw gameplay. That's a real risk, because now it's like, okay, are we looking at anything accurate? Is anything that we're seeing what the game's going to look like? Because I interpreted it as a graphical degradation, and Maddie's going to touch on what he feels is a mistake that people are making in light of that trailer.
Because based off the CG trailer we got, which was also very serious, they thought that it was going to go for something more photorealistic, especially when you see the hand come up, one with the sword, one with the spell. It looked like next-gen Skyrim.
It did look like next-gen Skyrim, and the problem is when you release a trailer like that, that image becomes that image becomes what everybody puts in every single art piece or tweet or blog. So this becomes the expectation in people's minds. You can't handwave this as CG. I don't agree with Maddie here. Oh, it's CG. People should have known it. No. Marketing of a video game, you have to know that when you simulate gameplay and you do this like, oh, you're in the perspective of the player thing, you can't say, oh, that was CG. Because most CG trailers don't do this. They don't make it seem like, oh, that's the game, like holding the gun or whatever. CG trailers are usually essentially a cinematic, a conversation, or like what we saw in the PlayStation showcase with Fair Games, or with the I'm forgetting the name of the other CG trailers that we saw. I just completely blanked. The Bungie one, Marathon. There we go. I've got it. And those trailers were pure CG. The Concord. It's like there's nothing. There's no gameplay. This looks like gameplay. I don't agree with hand-waving this and saying, oh, it was CG. People should have known that this wasn't what the game was going to look like.
And when you look at the art style, I don't think it's bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it's definitely different from CG. Yes.
Okay, again, yes, I agree with him that the art style doesn't look bad. If they would have shown this trailer as the debut of Avowed, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. It's because you had a trailer that looked like next-gen Skyrim with a crazy awesome spell in one hand and a really dope sword in another. And you can't say, well, it looks different than the CG. This is exactly why I told people to be very careful during every showcase. If it's in-engine footage, if it's in-game and they sort of simulate gameplay, that's not representative of the final product so often, and we see that in stark contrast when you compare the Avowed trailer to the gameplay debuted in the Xbox Game Showcase.
And since I started to see these conversations pop up online, I always like to deliver my opinion in a very matter-of-fact, straightforward manner so you don't wonder what I'm thinking, right? Because that's the least I can do for y'all. But I also try to do it in a way where I'm not an asshole, because I feel like there's just already enough of that online.
True.
But it's very hard to subdue the very sarcastic side of me that wants to say, y'all, it was CG. I mean, I know what people are talking about tonally, but if you listen to the gameplay trailer and the things that are going on and the actions that are ongoing on screen, I think it matches very well with what we saw from the CG trailer.
I don't agree with that at all. When we had to get halfway through the trailer and we were like, what game is this? Oh, it's Avowed. I don't think you can say, oh, it's really close to the CG trailer. We had no idea what we were looking at. It took us a moment. And even when I said, oh, it's Avowed, I was still not sure because it was such a gigantic departure from what we first saw. I just don't agree with this take at all.
Only when you watch those back to back can you really stitch that together, which none of us seeing Avowed for the first time would have had that experience. But because so many people saw the CG trailer and then saw the art style, they were like, I was expecting more than this.
If this is all the CG trailer was, I'd be on Maddie's team. I'd be like, you know what? You're right. It was just a cinematic. It was just some arrows flying through the sky, and the art went a different direction. It's more tonally adventurous, comic looking. It's more action looking. It doesn't quite look as serious, but that's not true about this trailer. I think is the minute you put the camera in the perspective of the player, you're setting expectations.
And if you wanted it to look, put this in quotes, better, totally understand. But for those who felt like it was supposed to appear as it was in CG, that's unfortunately a wake-up call to a lot of people, because you know the point of CG is to sell the idea of the game.
I think it's a wake-up call to the video game companies. Stop doing CG trailers that simulate gameplay, because you can't deliver that. Like, this is on the developers. This is on the marketing team. Whoever decided to greenlight this trailer, you're setting the expectation. To pretend as if it's on the consumer to go do proper research and like, well, was that gameplay or was that CG? Did they say on Twitter? Did they say in a blog? Like, we usually get obscure tweets from devs replying and saying, well, actually, it wasn't raw gameplay. It was captured in a dev testing environment. You cannot expect the consumer to go do that. I think that's an unrealistic expectation that I'm supposed to go and research so that what we're about to see, I know, like, oh, yeah, the game's not going to look like that. I should expect it to look like Sea of Thieves or something completely different than this. Me and Maddie do not see eye to eye on this. We do see eye to eye on the fact that the game looks cool. It looks fun. I want to play it. But you can't look at a CG trailer like this and say it doesn't set expectations when it literally puts the camera in the head of the player.
And I feel the idea was conveyed well into gameplay. It captured, to me, the same tone of you have power, what are you going to do with it? And that these lands are plagued, and you're either the source of saving it or destroying it. That's why in the gameplay trailer, they say, we are afraid of you because you can do anything. And the trailer captures this, you're like a chaotic breeze blowing through Eora, and you can handle it however you want. And to me, that was sort of what was set up in the first trailer, where it was like, these lands are sick. And you see it's very like war torn. That's all they know. And I have to just call it out and say, I feel we're being extremely rash in some corners of the internet on judging this game solely on the merits of an art style, which isn't even bad.
I agree. It's not bad. I do not agree with people who judge games based on their art style. Everybody is so addicted to photorealism. I agree with Maddie on that. People are way too quick to say game sucks, game looks bad, it looks like a cartoon, da-da-da. I saw people saying that side-scrollers shouldn't be full price. Like, shh, shush. That's so silly. Don't talk like that, right? Like, I agree with him. You can't preemptively judge something and jump to conclusion based on art style. Again, this is a loud and clear message to the marketing teams of games. Don't put out CG trailers that simulate gameplay that look nothing like the final product. The fact that I'm saying this shouldn't need to be said. We've been here before with simulated gameplay, with in-engine footage that looks nothing like the final product, and companies get taken to task for it. Do we need to go back and look at Watch Dogs 1, The Division 1, Anthem? These are great examples of gameplay that wasn't real, wasn't representative of the final product, and you can't say, well, it was CG, or it was simulated, or it was in-engine. You can't hand wave, okay? I do not agree with that attempt here. I think Maddie's a huge fan of the game, so his excitement in finally getting it to see, the game, he's forgetting that the general consumer, the general audience, is not nearly as tuned in as he is.
One thing if the game looked ugly, but it doesn't. And as far as I'm concerned, granted, many of you know this, but the biggest stickler for graphics. And for me, I'm going to take a page out of my good friend Ty Guy Travis's handbook here. I'm not going to totally claim this is my original thought, but I thought it was a great tweet, which is, you know what? A lot of these fantasy worlds are overly serious in the terms of their visual tone. I'm thinking of Elden Ring, for example. I got my fill of the very super serious, I put this in quotes, hyper realistic in the terms of art style design that we got in that game there. That is, to me, one of the best open world RPGs we ever got. It was a top 3 game of the year for me. It landed at number 2 personally.
Best open world game, probably next to Tears of the Kingdom. They nail open world exploratory purpose and true dynamic immersion discovery. Elden Ring's in a class all of its own. I agree with him on this too, and I agree with that tweet that he referenced. I actually prefer having something that doesn't just look like another photorealistic RPG with dragons and skeletons and stuff. And that's why I think if Avowed really wants to drill home its identity, they're going to have to really use some of those biomes that look really cool and some of the brighter colors, because a lot of the sequences and a lot of the scenes, I'm not seeing anything that really stands apart. I do agree. Not every single game needs to be some photorealistic tour de force of next-gen graphics. But I also don't think that the more cartoony, more adventure-style games that look like this, that look like Avowed, I don't necessarily think that's as distinct either.
It is a phenomenal game. So many fantasy games, such as later this year, we get Lords of the Fallen. Yes. Another more hyper-realistic, grueling type of fantasy RPG. to me, it's kind of fun to have a fantasy world that seems to take itself serious in narrative and in choices, but is fun and colorful to look at.
No.
It reminds me a bit of how I felt.
I totally
in the
agree with
Outer
him
Worlds.
here.
The splashes of color are so appreciated because
beautiful game.
I gotta say, I remember during the 360 PS3 generation, one of my biggest complaints were worlds almost had a filter of blue over them constantly. Nothing looked super colorful. It was blue or it was brown constantly, unless your art style was very cell shaded, something like Borderlands, then you get more diversity there. So I really get excited when I see color splashes. And
I agree with him 100% on this. I do. And that's one of the things I actually liked about Avowed is it had some of those brighter colors, some of those exciting biomes. Like if you watch the Avatar Frontiers of Pandora trailer, watch it at 4K on like a good screen or a good device. It looks so much better than that Ubisoft stream. The Ubisoft stream bitrate was terrible. That game looks gorgeous. And it's a good example of what he's talking about, like splashes of color.
And nothing here is so over-exaggerated in color. Maybe in the lighting, if anything, maybe in some of the color grading. I don't think so, but I could hear the argument on that, where I feel like it doesn't disrupt the overall tone of the game. The other thing some people are concerned about is co-op. Is this a co-op video game? I can't say for sure, but I'm not against it. I'll explain why it may not be co-op. When you go to the Xbox,
it seemed like those three people were running into the cave together. It did. So it does seem, multiple shots seem to show people fighting together. I get co-op vibes from this game. I do. I get go out and adventure with your buddies. I get that vibe, but I don't know if we've heard anything.
Xbox Wire post, again, this is, I'm not trying to be condescending. This is why it's good to read before posting the comments. A big focus is about companions. They talk about extensively, here's this companion. He's one of the first you meet in the game. He's going to help you walk through the living lands of Eora.
Okay, so he's not trying to be condescending to me. I should go read these blog posts. I don't go and read every blog post about every game. I don't even do that for games I'm really excited about because sometimes I want to be surprised, or sometimes I'm not hungry for every jot and tittle. Usually when you just go read the description of a game, it makes it clear if it's going to have co-op or not. And typically in these early stages, they're very scant on details. I wouldn't even really describe what Maddie's reading as being like a description of what you can or can't do in the game. But he is, I think, properly couching like, oh, hey, I saw a bunch of people fighting together. He's like, oh, well, companions are going to play a major role. Oh, well, that's an answer to the question. If you look at Dragon's Dogma 2, I got excited about that for the same reason, and then they addressed that in the trailer in the Capcom stream. They're pawns. They're NPCs you bring with you.
And they list some of his skill sets and whatnot, and you see in the trailer people following you around. And my guess is, much like we saw in, say, the Outer Worlds, where you had 2 followers running around with you, that these are the companions that are going to be joining you.
That's fair.
And it may very well just be a single-player game. Now, what we have to consider is there were rumors and reports of potentially there being co-op. Here's why I'm open to it, but I do want to see it in action, and I do want to know if it's going to disrupt the choice and consequence nature of the game, which I am personally very excited about.
I will say a lot of those sections didn't have a lot of room for another person. They were pretty small arenas with just a couple of enemies.
This goes back to, well, it's Obsidian Skyrim. I love Skyrim. I play Skyrim every year. Therefore, I kind of don't want to just double dip into the same thing twice, but with a different company. When I say that, I mean the companion focus would be a big differentiating factor for me because it looked like a major component of the gameplay based off the trailer. But the other thing that really spoke to me is if it is co-op, that is a big separating factor that makes Avowed, to me, on a gameplay level, more appealing than Skyrim, where Skyrim, I'm sitting there like, okay, I want to play online with my friends with this mod, but the mod breaks all these quests because the game was not built with multiplayer in mind.
I remember playing Skyrim in an Xbox party chat with my friend, just dying that we couldn't play together and fight dragons together. It was a heartbreaker. ESO is great, but doesn't quite scratch that Skyrim with another person itch that we wanted to scratch.
I imagine if it were full multiplayer, it would have been in that Xbox Wire post, but I'll still hold out my judgment. For now, I think what we saw were companions and that it is going to be a single player game.
I agree with that.
So I just feel this game is the product right now of a lot of assumptions, and that doesn't mean that it's going to end up being amazing if I'm right or it's going to be bad if a lot of people online are right. But I just feel like the conversation got immediately muddied for this one. And I'm not talking Fable level where it's like, yeah, that trailer wasn't crazy about it. But, you know, with Avowed, I feel like they showed a ton of gameplay. And strangely enough, I've seen online a lot of people saying, I wish Xbox showed more gameplay. And I was tabbing through the whole list. I'm like, everything that I could think of note had gameplay. So I don't know.
Well, I'm a huge Hellblade 2 fan, but it didn't feel like gameplay. There are segments like that in Hellblade that are very experiential, they're very cinematic, but that didn't really feel like gameplay. And Fable, I don't care what you say, I don't care how many bloggers claim this, that was not gameplay. It was in-game and in-engine footage, so it was a lot of simulated gameplay, like what it will attempt to look like, but it's not the same as what we saw from, like, Star Wars Outlaws, or even the gameplay sequences in this.
What we were missing there, but when it comes to first party, Avowed was definitely one of the few to have straight up raw gameplay.
Agreed.
And showing it all out.
I think what hurt it is the perceived artistic graphical degradation. He's correct. If they would have showed gameplay at the fidelity or art style of what they had already shown us, nobody would have taken a shot at Avowed. They'd have said, hey, that looks pretty cool. That looks like next-gen Skyrim.
So I gotta say, when it comes to this one, I was really happy with what I saw. I love Obsidian. We have no reason right now to doubt them, certainly with their output from the Outer Worlds to Pentiment to Grounded.
Agreed.
This team's been firing on all cylinders.
Agreed.
So that's the other thing, is I feel like we can give them the benefit of the doubt that we can scarcely give other companies. That's not to excuse dumb mistakes or whatever, but this isn't one. This is an art style, and I feel like the tone of the narrative was captured really well from trailer to trailer, but I don't think people were willing to listen to that. And when you look at the Xbox Wire post, I think it does settle down some of the concerns. But overall, I'm not here to tell you you're wrong for how you feel. I'm just here to express some of my thoughts. And for those who were expecting it to look like a CG trailer, again, not trying to talk down to anybody, but we got to like check ourselves for a moment here, because that's, you know, it should represent the gameplay, which all we saw was this sword and the spell in hand. And in that regard, it did represent it. But
do not agree. I think he should maybe check himself a teeny bit. Like, your presumption that people knew it was a CG trailer, your presumption that it wasn't representative of what the game was going to look like, well then, don't put the camera in the head of the player.
Again, I try to be fair with this type of stuff, and I don't want to come across like a complete douchebag. So hopefully you understand what I mean by all of this. And I'm curious as to your thoughts on Avowed, because again, I know this one seems a little more contentious than I personally anticipated. Maybe it's what people wanted versus what they got, which I'm certainly sympathetic to. But ladies and gentlemen, fire away with your thoughts on Avowed in the comments down below. I'm super excited.
Do it, do it. Go leave some comments for Maddie. Support his video. Let him know what you think. I agree with him on some points. I agree on everything doesn't need to be photorealistic. We don't need to judge a game purely for having an art style that's more adventurous or more comic style or more artistically driven instead of being photorealistically driven. I agree with him on those points. I do not agree that that trailer was blatantly CG or that it was blatantly not representative of what the game was supposed to look like. That image was circulating everywhere, and that again, it's a real valuable lesson. And don't show your game too early. Don't set those expectations too early, because first impressions mean a lot. And when the first impression is, holy moly, next-gen Skyrim, the graphics are going to be crazy, and then you get something that looks more like Sea of Thieves, I think people have a right to be disappointed. As always, support the videos that we react to as well as the channels. Hit subscribe and the bell button on this video so I can see you in the next one.